Hello lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. Today we're finally going to cover the third Uncharted game and the last of the original PS3 releases in Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception. Releasing in late 2011, Drake's Deception unfortunately had to try and follow up one of the greatest sequels of all time. So does it live up to Among Thieves, or did Naughty Dog ultimately take some steps backwards? In some aspects you can say they've managed to outdo the prior titles in the series, but in others, not so much. Starting out with the most subjective comparison, Uncharted 3's story aimed to go bigger, better, and have more twists and turns than ever before. Sadly, this ultimately leads to my biggest problem with Drake's Deception, but more on that later. The story picks up a couple years after that of the second game, seeing Nathan Drake and Sully meet with a man named Talbot, one of our main antagonists, who is attempting to purchase Nate's ring that just so happened to originally belong to Sir Francis Drake, continuing the connection between the two. Eventually, after some shenanigans, the villains end up with what they believe to be Drake's ring, and under the impression that Nate and Sully are dead. Only for that to obviously not be the case, as otherwise we wouldn't really have a game. As Nate along with his crew were actually trying to flush out Talbot and his client Merlot in order to stop them from finding Uber, also known as Atlantis of the Sands. This ultimately leads to a race between the two parties to see who can find it first. Although this setup has been used in the previous titles, where Nate is forced to basically race against someone else in order to find said treasure, I will say Uncharted 3 probably has the best setup of any of them. And even if I don't find the villains themselves to be particularly memorable or impactful, they're still well written overall, even if some of their motivations do get a little bit lost in the shuffle due to the amount of things going on within this game's story. In what is my personal favourite part of this game's story, we actually get to see a blast from the past and get to play as Nate when he was a kid. We get to learn of how he met Sully in the first place. Now, I can see where people would argue this slows the game's pacing down overall, and I do think that's fair, but considering we're on the third game and know next to nothing about their friendship or their past, it's really nice inclusion. Where 3 sadly does start to lose me a bit is the inclusion of so many characters. Now, the series as a whole is known to have its fair share of players within their respective stories, but in 3 it starts to feel a little too busy, because we have Nate, Sully, Cutter, Chloe, Elena, Talbot, Catherine, and several others, with everyone having their own influence on the story. I can appreciate trying to make everyone be impactful and have their place, but honestly, I could have lived without some of these characters. Someone like Ramses is a great example of this. He's a character who seems to be here just to add padding to the overall story, rather than actually having any real impact. He slows things down in a way that I just don't like. He feels like he has more screen time than the main villains, and it made those villains feel like they were off screen while he did all the work, and it made the heroes have unnecessary drama in order to keep things interesting. Don't get me wrong, a little bit of this is fine, but it just felt like there were too many moments of this throughout the game, and it was just there for the sake of being there. I could go into more detail about the story, but overall I will say it's something that I would say is on par or just a smidge below the second game, but it's definitely something that I would say overall is worth experiencing, so I don't really want to spoil the twists and turns. In my video on Among Thieves, I mentioned that it strikes a pretty much perfect balance between the action and its cinematic approach, and although 3 has a great story overall, it really does drop the ball because it goes way too hard into the cinematic approach for me. For the cutscenes, characters, and events, it all makes sense, but the problem is they use this approach in the gameplay sections as well. They try to raise the pulse-pumping action to another level, which on paper sounds great, but in reality it impacts your ability to enjoy the game because the camera angles become insufferable. And this is because at certain points of the game they use fixed camera angles, which is great for a Resident Evil game, not so great for a third-person action game. And although the series has technically done this before, it's usually during climbing sections where it's not really a big deal because it's really easy to figure out where you're going. However, these fixed camera angles get used while you're trying to run away from enemies, and it really makes it hard to figure out where the hell you're going. Thankfully it doesn't happen too much throughout the game, but it's definitely enough to be noticeable. Where the cinematic approach works incredibly well is in the game's overall presentation. Like the previous titles, Uncharted 3 set a new bar for what could be expected of the PlayStation 3 at the time. Though not a generational level leap forward, Uncharted 3 is undoubtedly the best looking in the series at the point of its release. From better texture work, character models, and arguably the best soundtrack in the trilogy, there is very little to fault with Uncharted 3's presentation. The voice acting is just as good as you would expect, and everyone is believable for the characters that they're playing. However, where I would say Uncharted 3 really starts to stand out from its predecessors is in its lighting. With the amount of varied locations and times of day that we get to see, there could have been an easy excuse for them to say, say, let's phone it in and just do enough to make it look okay. But instead, every single location and time of day is represented incredibly well. The lighting takes the overall visuals to the next level for me, and it really adds to the overall, let's say it together, immersion. From a gameplay perspective, things haven't changed all that much from the second game. I would say things are just a little bit tighter in pretty much every aspect you would expect, and ultimately that's all I can really say. The gun combat feels pretty much the same, puzzles are, at least in my opinion, slightly improved, and the parkour just feels that little bit better. But why did people consider it such a step backwards compared to the second game? Well, simply put, that is that cinematic approach that I mentioned before. Those fixed camera angles make things really insufferable, and thanks to the ridiculous amount of combat sections, they completely screwed up the balance that they managed to find in the second game. There were just too many enemies with shields and rocket launchers, meaning you get pinned down and can't move for ages. Sure, in a one-on-one fight these enemies are great, but when you have like 10 of them, it's incredibly frustrating. That means the really good level design never really gets to shine because you just get pinned down and can't make use of what's there. The biggest sin is the fact that the combat hasn't really evolved from that of the first game. The hand-to-hand combat is about the only thing that has changed since the first game, and even then, it's not exactly the focus of the series. And Uncharted 3 commits a massive sin of reusing the same animations and button prompts against a specific type of enemy, with that being the big guy. It happens multiple times throughout, and it comes off really lazy. I'm by no means a game designer, I don't claim to be, and I don't know exactly how you could evolve the series, but I could definitely understand why people wanted a little bit more from this franchise at this point. Although it felt like the story tried to take some risks, the gameplay didn't, which is where this game is a bit frustrating. It's a completely playable game. Hell, even overall, it's pretty damn enjoyable. It's just a flawed game, one that flew a little too close to the sun when trying that cinematic approach considering the medium in which the story is being delivered. If you haven't played it, I would highly recommend it, but I would make sure that you play the first two games first and maybe take a little bit of a break before you play the third, mainly because you're going to be doing the same gameplay loop over and over again, so you might want a little bit of a break. So with that, lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, it brings us to the end of another video. I hope you enjoyed this look back at Uncharted 3. If it is your favorite, or if you have another favorite in the Uncharted series, let me know in the comment section below, because I'm always curious. For me, this game ranks kind of dead middle of the entire franchise. If I had to say why it doesn't get any higher, it's mainly just the boatyard section, because I hate the boatyard section. It's too long, there's too many enemies, and it ruins the pacing. It could have been great, it just has too much. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting that like button. If you want to go that extra step, you can hit the subscribe button. And if you want to go that extra mile, you can support me on Ko-fi, YouTube memberships, or Patreon like these lovely people here. And with that said, join the Discord, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. Bye.